The galaxy's border was supposed to be quiet tonight. Out beyond the twinkling sprawl of the galactic core, where the Empire's dominion was absolute, the edge sectors were nothing more than dust and empty stars. Patrol routes were routine, almost ceremonial, designed to remind the lesser species that the Empire still watched. But tonight, something moved in the dark. Captain Tarl Vex of the Imperial cruiser Vanguard leaned forward in his command throne, his secondary eyes narrowing on the holographic display. An object had appeared out of nowhere, no jump signature, no transponder ping. No known record. "Confirm that reading," Vex ordered, his voice sharp. The sensor officer's frilled neck pulsed with unease. "Confirmed, Captain. Object is large. Metallic. But it's not on any Imperial registry." "Then scan it again," Vex hissed. "And broadcast Imperial identification protocols. Whoever they are, they're trespassing." Across the border, deep in the black void of unclaimed space, the unknown ship remained still like a predator waiting in the tall grass. Then it moved. A low hum shivered through the Vanguard's hull as the intruder accelerated silently, impossibly closing the distance with a speed that should have been impossible for something its size. "Sir," the sensor officer's voice broke, mandibles clattering nervously. "It's locking weapons. Raise shields. Prepare to." The first strike hit like the wrath of a dead god. Vex's words dissolved into static as the Vanguard's shields collapsed in an instant. The next pulse tore through the cruiser's hull, detonating half its reactor. Alarm screamed as the ship's guts vented fire and bodies into the void. "Get me fleet command." Vex roared, gripping the edge of his throne with all four hands as his ship buckled under the assault. But before the distress beacon could transmit, the intruder fired again. And the Vanguard, a fully armed Imperial cruiser, was reduced to molten debris. Light years away, inside the Imperial War Ministry, Supreme Strategos Dreljot stood frozen as the battle feed cut to black. "That was a frontline cruiser," one of his aides whispered, horrified. "And it was destroyed in less than 30 seconds, said another. Dreljot's spines bristled. "What system did this occur in?" "Sector 39, near the Terran Expanse," came the reply. Jot's mandibles clicked softly. Terran Expanse. That was the name for a backwater system barely worth taxing. The Empire had charted it centuries ago and found nothing but a blue-green planet populated by primitive bipeds still squabbling over continents. And yet, something had appeared there. Something not in their records. Something that just annihilated an Imperial ship as though it were made of paper. "Dispatch a full armada," Jot said coldly. "I want that thing identified and destroyed before the Senate hears about this." Earth, 22nd century. John Mason stood on the observation deck of Dauntless, humanity's first and only deep space battleship. She was old, older than him by nearly a century, a relic from the silent war humanity had fought alone against the nameless things that had come from beyond Sol. The ship's dark hull still bore the scars of those battles, but Dauntless had never been defeated. And tonight, she had just destroyed something far more dangerous than anything from the silent war and alien warship. "Status report," Mason said, his voice steady though his heart hammered in his chest. Lieutenant Sarah Blake, his XO, turned from her console. "Target destroyed. No survivors detected." "Good." Mason exhaled slowly, staring at the empty stars beyond the viewport. "Then we just bought Earth a little more time." He knew this was only the beginning. Whoever those aliens were, they would come looking for their lost ship. And when they found Dauntless, when they found Earth, there would be no hiding anymore. For a century, humanity had kept quiet, building in secret, recovering from the war that no one else in the galaxy had ever known about. They had thought themselves alone, the only intelligent life within reach. But now the galaxy was awake. And it was coming. Back in Imperial space, the fleet mobilized. 20 warships, 3 carriers, hundreds of fighters, an armada large enough to pacify an entire rebellious sector. Supreme Strategos Jot watched the deployment from the command dais, his mind cold and calculating. Whoever this unknown enemy was, they would learn the price of striking the Empire. And yet, deep in his marrow, Jot felt something he had not felt in centuries. Fear. The Imperial Armada emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of steel locusts. 20 warships formed a glittering wall of firepower, carriers unspooling squadrons of attack craft that fanned out across the void. Fighters traced lethal arcs in perfect formation, ready to strike at whatever had dared humiliate the Empire. On the bridge of the flagship Iron Talon, Fleet Marshal Cas Thurn stood with his hands clasped behind his back. "Begin wide-spectrum scans," Thurn ordered. "Locate the target. Eliminate it." The fleet fanned out. Pulse scanners bathed the star system, sweeping every planet, moon, and stray asteroid. Then they found it. Hanging just above the fourth planet, blue, green, beautiful, was the ship. It was black, angular, larger than most of their cruisers, and utterly unmarked. But there was something else about it. Something that made the fur along Thurn's neck rise. The thing just hovered there. No transponder ping. No broadcast. No attempt to run. "Sir," said his sensor officer slowly, "it's powering weapons." "Then destroy it." Thurn barked. The order went out. And the sky over Earth burned. On Dauntless Bridge, alarms flared. Multiple hyperspace contacts. Lieutenant Blake reported, her face pale. "At least 20 capital ships, sir, plus fighter wings. They're spreading into attack formation." Mason gritted his teeth. This was what he had feared, full-scale retaliation. "All batteries, stand by," he ordered. "Target priority, carriers first. If we're going down, we take their air cover with us." The first salvo came like a meteor shower, streaks of plasma and mass driver fire crossing the void. Dauntless shields flared brilliant blue, absorbing the first hits, but the next volley slammed harder, shaking the decks. Shields holding, barely. Blake shouted. "Return fire," Mason said, his voice calm but cold. Dauntless roared. Her spinal railguns spat hypersonic slugs, each one a tungsten spear longer than a bus, crossing the void in seconds. The first carrier's shields buckled, the second shot punched through its midsection, and the third split the vessel apart in a blossom of fire. The fighter wings screamed into attack runs, but Dauntless point defense turrets whirred to life, throwing out a storm of tracer fire. Dozens of interceptors vaporized before they ever reached missile range. Still, there were too many. "Port shield is failing," Blake cried. "Rotate hull, give them the starboard side." Mason barked. "Load Shiva torpedoes." 2 massive launch bays opened on Dauntless' underside. The torpedoes streaked free, engines glowing white-hot, cutting through the enemy formation. One detonated in the middle of a cruiser wing, its antimatter payload collapsing the vessel into a blinding implosion. The other tore the heart out of a destroyer, the shockwave ripping 2 escort frigates to shrapnel. On the Iron Talon, Fleet Marshal Thurn gripped the railing, stunned. "This is impossible," he hissed. "One ship cannot do this." "Sir, we are losing vessels faster than we can reinforce the line." "Concentrate fire," Thurn bellowed. "Bring everything to bear, everything." The fleet obeyed. Beams of plasma converged on Dauntless from every angle. "Brace!" Mason roared. The bridge shook like the fist of a god had struck it. Consoles blew sparks, crew were thrown from their stations. "Forward shields gone," Blake shouted, blood trickling from a cut on her brow. "We can't take another hit like that." "Then we hit them first," Mason growled. He keyed the final authorization code. Deep in Dauntless' belly, the ship's last weapon spun up, a relic from the Silent War, built to kill things far stronger than any alien fleet. "Spinal particle lance charged," Blake reported, voice tight. Mason's jaw clenched. "Fire!" A blinding white beam erupted from Dauntless' prow, cutting across the void. It sliced through the Iron Talon's shields like they weren't there, spearing the flagship from bow to stern. On Thurn's bridge, everything went white. When the light faded, the Iron Talon was gone, nothing left but incandescent debris. The surviving Imperial ships faltered. For the first time in centuries, an Imperial fleet was in full retreat. "Sir, they're withdrawing," Blake whispered. Mason leaned back in his chair, his breath ragged. Let them go, he said. He knew this victory was only temporary. The Empire wouldn't stop. They would come back, with more ships, more weapons, more rage. But now they knew something the galaxy had never known. Humanity wasn't prey. Far away, in the heart of Imperial space, the Senate chambers erupted in chaos. Reports of the fleet's destruction flooded in, accompanied by a single terrifying truth. The enemy ship was not in their archives. It had no history, no registration, no species marker. It had appeared from nowhere, annihilated their armada, and vanished again into the void. Supreme Strategos Jot stood in the center of the chamber, his spines flat with dread. This was no pirate. No rogue faction, he said slowly. This was something else. Something we have never encountered before. Then find it, a senator demanded. Jot's voice was low, almost a whisper. Oh, we will. But understand this, whatever it is not afraid of us. The stars over Sol had never looked so cold. Captain John Mason stood alone on the dauntless observation deck, staring at the planet below. Earth glowed like a blue jewel, oblivious to the storm about to break upon it. They'll come back, Mason said softly. Behind him, Lieutenant Sarah Blake approached, her uniform still streaked with soot from the last battle. Command has confirmed it, she said quietly. Long-range telescopes picked up mass hyperspace activity. They're bringing half the core fleet this time. Mason's jaw tightened. He had known this would happen. The first battle had been a warning shot. This would be the reckoning. How long do we have? 36 hours. Mason nodded slowly. Then it's time. He turned to the console and keyed a code no human had used in nearly 100 years. Deep within Earth's crust, hidden vaults awakened. Massive hangars buried under mountain ranges rumbled as doors the size of cities ground open. Across the solar system, humanity's secret was revealed. Dauntless had never been alone. In orbit over Jupiter, Titanic-shaped stirred warships, dark and silent, dormant since the Silent War. They rose from the storm-racked moon bases, their hulls glinting with ancient scars. Colossus-class battleships. Leviathan carriers. Dreadnoughts whose names had been scrubbed from every public record. In the asteroid belt, hidden shipyards flared to life, launching swarms of interceptors and strike frigates. Humanity had never stopped building. They had never stopped preparing. They had only been waiting for the day they would need to remind the universe why Dauntless was called what she was. 36 hours later, the sky split. The Imperial fleet arrived in force. It was an armada unlike anything the frontier had ever seen, hundreds of warships, gleaming carriers, fortress cruisers bristling with weapons. The void lit with the shimmer of their arrival, the Empire's pride on full display. Fleet Marshal Vornkreck stood aboard the Sovereign Wrath, his gaze burning with righteous fury. No mercy, Krex ordered, his voice carrying across the command deck. We end this insult today. Burn their world if you must, but erase that ship from existence. The Imperial fleet surged forward. And then humanity answered. From behind the moon, a shadow moved, then another, and another. The first salvo came not from Dauntless, but from Aegis, the largest human dreadnought ever built. Its spinal cannon fired once, and an Imperial destroyer vanished in a flash of plasma. Then the rest of the fleet appeared. 30 human warships dropped from stealth formation, their hulls dark, their drives silent until the moment they opened fire. Railguns roared. Torpedoes streaked across the void. The Imperial formation staggered as its forward line was shredded. On the Sovereign Wrath, Krex bared his fangs. So, he growled, there are more of them. Good. Then we destroy them all. The void erupted. Mason sat in Dauntless' command chair, voice steady despite the chaos. Concentrate fire on their carriers, he ordered. No reinforcements, no fighters. Blake nodded sharply. Weapons locked. The bridge shook as enemy fire hammered the shields, but Dauntless held, her ancient armor shrugging off hits that would have gutted lesser ships. All guns, fire. Mason barked. The spinal lance fired again, spearing an enemy carrier clean through. The blast ripped it apart, scattering molten debris across its own fighter wings. Missiles from Aegis and Valiant followed, saturating the enemy formation, forcing them into disarray. The battle raged for hours. Imperial ships died screaming, their formations breaking apart under the relentless precision of humanity's fleet. But the cost was high. Human ships were burning, too. On the port flank, the Resolute went down in a fireball, her crew sacrificing themselves to take an enemy cruiser with them. On the starboard, Hammerfall's hull split, venting half her decks into space, but she still fired her last torpedoes before she died. Humanity bled, but they would not break. At last, the Imperial flagship faced Dauntless head-to-head. On the Sovereign Wrath, Krex snarled. Target their lead ship. Fire all batteries. A storm of plasma engulfed Dauntless. Shields buckled. Deck plating ruptured. Fire tore through her corridors. Mason gritted his teeth. Bring the lance online now. Blake turned, horror in her eyes. Sir, the main reactor's at critical load. If we fire, we might not survive it. Mason's expression hardened. Then we go down swinging. The particle lance fired. It struck the Sovereign Wrath mid-keel, punching through its core. The Imperial flagship exploded, its death cry blinding the sensors of every ship in the system. And then the remaining Imperial vessels ran. Silence settled over the void. Mason sat back in his chair, blood running down his temple, staring at the burning wrecks drifting through the stars. They'll be back, Blake said quietly. Yes, Mason said. His voice was like iron. But next time, they'll think twice. Far away, in the Imperial Senate, the mood was no longer defiant. It was fearful. The Strategos stood before them, voice grim. We have discovered what destroyed our fleets, he said. It was no rogue warlord, no hidden faction. He let the words hang like a blade. It was a species. The Senate chamber erupted, but Jot silenced them with a gesture. Understand this, he said, his voice low. This was not a rebellion. This was a message. There is something out there that does not fear us. Something that can fight us and win. And across the galaxy, for the first time in millennia, the Empire felt something it had almost forgotten. Fear. Back aboard Dauntless, Mason looked out over Earth, still shining against the black. They wanted to know who we were, he murmured. Blake glanced at him. And what did we tell them? Mason's eyes were cold as the stars. That we're human, he said. And we don't kneel to anyone.